Hey everyone, welcome to another one of my weekly wrap-up streams. Sorry I'm only 1 minute late, and I do have an explanation. My camera decided to take a journey at the very last minute behind my desk, so I had to go crawling around for that. But thankfully, hopefully, this shouldn't have the same issues that were popping up last week. I don't really know why it didn't alert people, why people weren't getting the notification that I was live. But hopefully that will not happen this week. But I did actually shift the live stream up, as you can probably tell. For those who don't watch this when it's live, I've been currently doing it at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time to the US, which is 11 p.m. my time. And considering that these wrap-up videos tend to be an hour or over an hour long, I wanted to actually be able to sleep before on a Saturday night, so I decided to shift it up just basically to make it easier on myself, because I am tired otherwise. I've got work Sundays, and have had work most Sundays recently, and it's kind of a struggle, kind of a hassle to wake up 4 or 5 hours after I've gone to bed with the live stream. So as currently the US is in or out of or something daylight savings time, I decided to shift this up for myself just because it's easier. So for the foreseeable future, until daylight savings goes back, or what, like, because we don't do daylight savings where I am, so I'm always like trying to figure out what the time difference is comparatively. So hopefully, things will work out a little bit better, than the last couple of weeks. I don't know. Maybe I'll still talk for far too long and get no sleep. Who knows? We'll have to find out. But actually, not a huge amount that I read this week. It's kind of been. Hi, Lasagna. Welcome to the live stream. But I haven't read a huge amount this week just because I have been prioritizing other things. But hopefully there's still a little bit to talk about. I will talk about my novel that I did read. It was a library novel, one that I've had on my stack for a while, and I actually had to borrow it out again because I actually had it out for too long. I didn't want to. I returned it and then immediately borrowed it out again, because I was only about halfway through the book when it was overdue. So this is the final of the Discworld novels by Terry Pratchett. This is Raising Steam, which is one of the novels following Moise von Lipwig, who in the later novels, those who have followed Discworld, you may be familiar with him. He is previously in a previous life was a con man, but now currently is the postmaster, so head of the mail, like postage, as well as the head of the National Bank and the Royal Mint. And this time he has an opportunity to invest in the steam engine, locomotion. So that's sort of the main focus of this particular novel, is how the society of Ankh-Morpork has now evolved and changed due to the steam engine being introduced, and how that impacts both those looking to make money and normal people and obviously how it's reflective of actual history and how the steam engine greatly impacted society in general once it was kind of discovered and harnessed and all these other things. It's a fun time, of course. It is the last of Discworld that we have gotten and will ever get, because obviously Sir Terry Pratchett has unfortunately passed away. But I think it was a pretty strong note to end on. I do like the novels Falling Moist. I think he's a pretty interesting character. And of course, Pratchett, his stuff is always funny, always very, very accurate, topical, even now. Not that this is a super old book. When did this one come out exactly? Yeah, 2013. So it's not a super duper old book, especially in comparison to some of the earliest of Discworld. But it's a fun time. It's exactly what you expect when you're reading these books. And for me, it was nice to actually get to the end, see how the series as a whole ended. All of the characters are in pretty good positions, and I don't think you could really ask for much more. In terms of, we know that Pratchett's daughter doesn't want to continue Discworld. She's not a novelist, for one, but for two, she just would prefer her father's legacy to stay his legacy. She doesn't want anyone to, and the estate in general doesn't want anyone to continue Discworld, which I really respect, and I think that's, Pratchett was able to build the world that he wanted to in his lifetime. And I think we have 40 like plus books to enjoy already and reread and revisit, that we don't really need new content that hasn't had any sort of impact or anything with him in it. So it's not a sad thing that this is the last one, but it just is the marking of how, and it's kind of interesting in that the society, the city is changing so much in this novel. It's a really real turning point into the modern age, as it were, for these characters with the events of this book. And I can really respect that as being the ending point for Discworld and for the citizens of Ankh-Morpork. So yeah, I mean, I know that me talking about Discworld every week or every second week is maybe not the most important thing. I don't know why my nose itches. Every time I sit down to do these, I'm fine all day. And then as soon as I sit down, my nose itches. So apologies. But I know that it can't always be that interesting talking about Discworld for viewers. But I have a couple more to read, and then I will have read the entirety of the series. I haven't read them quite in order. I've read some things more in order than other things. But it's always a great time. Always a great time. Then I'm going to do the light novel next. So I read a light novel. I actually read it today. And that's the true joy of light novels, is you can get through them pretty quickly. Thank you. I'm glad that people find me talking about the novel side interesting. Discworld is a great time. There's a bunch of adaptations of it for the stage. I know there's been a couple television, like miniseries adaptations, radio dramas. It's a really cool world to dive into. And if you like dark humor and very cutting social commentary and satire, then absolutely check out Discworld. But I followed that up with the other prose that I read this week. Was a light novel, only 200 pages, so I was able to smash it out in the couple hours that I had before the live stream. And I totally understand that, Lasagna. It is a series because there's 40 odd books, including compendiums and a whole bunch of other stuff. There's so many books, right? But the great thing about it is a lot of them are kind of within self-contained storylines that follows the same characters. And I mentioned this before, but like this book in particular and two of the others follow Moist von Lipwig. Doesn't matter. But he was sort of a later character to be introduced. The characters that show up more often in more of the books are Rincewind the Wizard and the various wizards at Unseen University. So there's multiple characters the multiple books following the wizards and the universities. There's, of course, the witches, which is obviously a counterpoint to that, who are Granny Weatherwax and her associates, and how witching is different from wizarding. It's very, very good. And then there's also other books that focus on the city watch or the kind of the law enforcement. They're always a really fun time, really interesting cast of characters there. Especially, of course, the main character, the Commander Vimes. And there's also little bits and pieces in between all of that are standalone novels. So you can kind of dive into them without necessarily having read all of the previous stuff, just so long as you are aware you're going into a fantasy world. I'm trying to think if there's any other... I mean, there's certain books that focus on the gods and stuff as well, but there's really, if you start at the beginning for those certain character, like, driven stuff, then you shouldn't be too confused. And there's a lot of crossover with characters. You see a lot of the same faces pop up. And I really think, like, I would say most people would agree that you don't have to start with the first novel or the first two novels, The Color of Magic and The Light Fantastic. Not that they're bad books, but they're not the strongest of Discworld, and they are ones that you can kind of go back to and see how this world started, but it's not like necessary reading. Necessarily, I should say. But yeah, Discworld is fun. It's fun, and it is something that you can kind of pick and choose. And if you read up a little bit on the particular characters and which ones you want to follow, then I think it's a little bit easier to decide where to start. Because it is, like, 40 novels is a lot of novels. Also, there's, like, the young adult stuff in there as well. I can't remember the character's name because I haven't actually read any of the young adult stuff yet. But anyway, enough about Discworld. We're going to talk about the light novel that I read this week. Read today, I should say. One that I always love coming back to. I absolutely adore whenever I get one of these novels, because it's written by one of my favorite light novelist authors, and it's like in my top 3 ongoing light novels. It may be my number 1 favorite ongoing light novel, and that is, of course, Buccaneer. This is volume 14 by Ryogo Narita, and this is 1931, Another Junk Railroad Special Express. So this, if my camera would focus, is if you've seen the anime of Buccaneer, right? There's 3 or 4 episodes at the end that are OVAs that occur after the events of the main series, which follows kind of the first schism between the Kimura and their brush with immortality. And then also the Flying Pussyfoot story arc. And this novel is the expansion on it. Those OVAs are what this novel is. Some things are expanded here and there, but if you've seen those OVAs, you know what the events of this novel are. It's after the events of the Flying Pussyfoot. A couple days after that, we have Chane as sort of one of our main characters who's struggling with her personal connection with her father, who's the only person she's ever been close with, and her kind of tenuous friendship with Jacuzzi and his friends, and then of course Claire, who is trying to profess his love to Chane. And whilst all of that is going on, Graham, who is an associate of Lad's, has one, like, his plans are out the window because Lad got in some trouble on the train. Let's just put it that way. And thus he wants, I don't really remember like why, but he wanted to kidnap Eve Genoard because he heard that Jacuzzi and his friends were like hanging out at her manor or at her house. And so they decide to kidnap her and ransom her. Unfortunately, they grab Chane instead, who is not Eve, and hijinks ensues. We also see Claire wandering around, trying to figure out how he's going to profess his love to this beautiful young woman who just stole his heart atop a train. And the fear that he strikes in a lot of people, including, of course, Ches. So we have all of those events, characters that we are familiar with, and as well as other characters that you're familiar with, right? But that have been introduced more thoroughly throughout the other story arcs of Buccaneer. So we get oblique references to Elmer in this. Huey has kind of a large part, and mostly in discussion with Victor, who is a character that we don't see a huge amount of, but is one of the other immortals, the FBI agent. We have the actual villain of the piece, and it's always interesting. Like the previous volume was sort of when they were revealed as existing in this world, this major villain. And that the previous volume was a future story arc, like future 2001 set story. And it was a shock to me. I don't know if it was necessarily that shocking when people were first reading it, but I'm going to say I wasn't expecting it, and oh my goodness. Like, definitely a big bad. And from that, because we have that character now playing into this whole situation and seeing how their existence and their actions have impacted the characters around them, Ches, Huey, Elmer, etc., it'll be interesting to see how the series goes from here. This particular book, as I said, is 1931, but I think the next story arc that's following it, I think the next book is going to be a 1710 story, so way back, which we've only had one novel cover so far. And then from there, we're going to be jumping to 1935. It's hard to describe Buccaneer because, like with all of Naris's works, there's so many different things going on. There's so many characters. You're always being introduced to new characters as well. That is really hard to succinctly explain things, especially in a volume 14 where there are so many character backgrounds and storylines and things that are reliant on previous books. I will say that Buccaneer is wonderful. It's my favorite of Naruta's novels. People are probably more familiar with Durarara, but I know that Buccaneer does have a very dedicated fan base from the anime as well as the novels, and it's been really nice getting the novels in their entirety. I do also have Durarara as well. I don't talk about it as much, and I feel like the reason I enjoy Buccaneer more than Durarara is not necessarily because it's written better or anything like that. The setting is more interesting. The characters are more interesting. And I would just, okay, so if you know nothing about Buccaneer, it is set in 1930, well, the main story is set in 1930s United States, following a bunch of characters, as always, hundreds of characters, during this period of American history where there's a lot going on. There's the Great Depression, there's the Prohibition is rife, and from that has grown bootlegging and speakeasies, and of course the strengthening of the mafia and other gang groups and organized crime. And so the world, or the US, is kind of reflecting that, and these characters are reflecting that. So it's interesting. Like Buccaneer, I would say the first novel was, I think, Naruta's first ever novel, or at least his first published work. It won a prize, like one of the novelist prizes that tended to be how people got published back in the day before everything was web publishing. And so the first novel is quite self-contained, but it's also like not the strongest of the series. And I would say that if you're not immediately hooked by the first book, give it until the second arc, i.e. books 2 and 3, to kind of capture your interest. This book, because it follows that second arc, the Flying Pussyfoot stuff, it does have a lot of those characters, obviously, Chane, Claire, Huey, Jacuzzi, and Nice and his friends and stuff. So you see a lot of familiar faces, but then also general reference to other characters. But yeah, so 1930s USA, we have a bunch of characters, from mafioso to Kimura, to who are like, they're not as big as the mafia, but they are more ruthless than the mafia. We also have Jacuzzi and his gang, who are like bootleggers. And then we also have the supernatural element of certain characters who have drunken this potion of immortality and thus cannot die. And that causes a lot of shenanigans, because there's characters who have been around for centuries, and then there's other characters who have newly acquired immortality through crazy hijinks. And obviously, when you are living in this violent world of organized crime and you can't die, then people start to notice, and or that really influences how things are done. It's a good time. I will say not all the characters are immortal, but even the non-immortal ones are great to read. I really like Buccaneer a lot. I'm with these, like, this novel does have anime, like an anime version thanks to the OVAs, but majority of the novels before this point hasn't. So you do get into new content quite quickly. I think it's volume 5 is where new stuff gets introduced. Volume 4 is like half adapted, And then Volume 5, I think, is completely new, completely different story arc. Yes, it is, because that one's a 2001 storyline. But yeah, this was super quick and easy. Only 5 or 6 chapters with the prologues and interludes, which are pretty typical for Naruto book as well as the Buccaneer book. Yeah, I can't wait till volume 15. I think there's 22, 23 of these in Japanese, so we're slowly catching up. I think the series has been on hiatus for a little while. And I hope that Naruto is working on it and kind of deciding how to wrap it up, because I think that it's a series that definitely deserves a strong ending. There's a lot of loose ends to tie up, but I do have faith that Naruto will do it, because he's been able to with his other series, which aren't as expansive as Buccaneer, but certainly has just as many characters. But yeah, so I read this, and check out Buccaneer if you haven't. Even if you're not really a light novel fan, if you're someone who doesn't really know anything about light novels, and especially like the current crop of popular ones don't seem like interesting to you, we know that I'm not like a huge fan of the current trend in light novels, isekai, pro-slavery stuff that just seems to be, or like stuck in a game stuff that just seems to be so prolific. Even like I'm even getting kind of tired of the reverse harem reincarnated stuff. Like Baccarina is fun, and Tyrion Empire has been fun, but it's not like my favorite stuff. And I think it says something that a lot of my favorite light novels, not all of my favorite light novels, but majority of my favorite light novels kind of predate this current wave of what's popular. Stuff like Buccaneer, stuff like Spice and Wolf. But of course, like I am still enjoying. Hey, welcome to the live stream. I'm glad you could pop in. But we do know that I do follow some of the newer stuff. Ascendance of a Bookworm is kind of the one that immediately jumps to mind. But Apothecary Diaries is one that I'm really keen on. Ocarina, as I said, Tyrion Empire, as I said. But yeah, I mean, light novels are very hit and miss. I think we can all agree on that. And there's a lot of stuff that I'm not really a fan of, but there's also a lot of stuff that I am a fan of, and there's also a lot of stuff that I hope gets relicensed, like 12 Kingdoms, because that would make my day. I don't really follow a lot of like current light novels. I'm just, there's just so many light novels coming out all of the time, just like there's so much manga coming out all of the time. But if J Novel Club wanted to give me 12 Kingdoms, I would be down for that. Like, I would be really happy about that, actually. But we'll see. Anyway, super short video, because I only have one more thing to talk about, which is the manga that I read this week. And it's one series, but I read multiple volumes. It was a series that I wanted to finish this week because I got the last volume, so I was excited. I was like, yay, I can actually finish it. And that is volumes 5 to 8 of O Maidens in Your Savage Season by Mari Okada, written by Mari Okada, and Nao Emoto is the artist. So you may be familiar with Okada's directorial work. She has directed a lot of stuff, but I think her most popular and well-known stuff is, of course, Anohana. Makuya was her directorial debut. She's done really good stuff, as again, like Anohana, like a lot of like emotional stuff, but then also some not great stuff. Like that one season of Black Butler that nobody talks about, i.e. Black Butler season 2. We don't talk about that one, but yes, she wrote that. So very mixed bag from her, to say the least. And even her most popular stuff, I'm not a diehard fan of Okura. I feel like a lot of her titles, even her best titles, are very emotionally manipulative, which is something I've talked about before, in where a series like leans on the melodrama so hard in order to make you feel sad, in a very manipulative, non-natural way. And it's not really a criticism, because that's the point. Like, Anohana, of course, is meant to be a sad story about grief, and how people deal with the loss of someone important to them. But then some of the other things, like Mokuya, is also like very touching about motherhood and mother-child relationships and things like that. But also, it's like, that there's certain elements of that film that are there because, like, oh, yes, you will cry in the cinema. You will feel bad about this, and you will want to, like, sob your heart out, which you do in the moment. But for me, I always find it, like, a little bit difficult to fully enjoy those series, because I know that the staff or the creators are, like, trying their damnedest to make me feel sad, in a way that they just, again, pile on the tragedy, pile on all of this melodrama, that it feels almost absurd. It feels so beyond what reality is that it kind of loses its effect. Hello, welcome to the stream. Maybe that's niche to talk about Black Butler too, but I mean, that's a train wreck. And if we're talking about Mari Okura, that's a series that she wrote, right? She did scripts for that. So we can't, just because she's done good stuff doesn't mean we should completely forget the bad stuff either. But in saying that, A Maidens in Your Savage Season is by far my favorite title that she's done, by far. And for all my criticisms, I have so much respect for Okura as well. Like, I will never take away her success. I think it is incredible what she's been able to do, and how she's been able to do it as well. I do recommend her biography. It's really, really good. And it's an interesting insight to being a woman within the anime industry, being a creative voice within the anime industry. But so this is, I think, her first manga series. Hello, Blackwind. Welcome to the stream. I'm glad that people kind of understand what I'm talking about with the forced angst, the forced melodrama. Something else that does it a lot, and that I always have issue with, is key. So key adaptations, stuff like Clannad, Canon, Air. Little Busters I didn't have the issue with, but maybe that's because it's not a dating sim in the same way that those series are. I don't know, man. I liked Little Busters a lot more than Clannad or Canon or Air. But that just might be my bias showing as well, because I don't... normal dude saving every girl he's ever met from their past trauma is not always the most enthralling thing for me personally. But yeah, anyway, we're not talking about that. We're talking about Amazing Savage Season, which has had an anime adaptation. I don't know if it's a complete anime adaptation, because I have not yet watched it. I don't know whether it's good or not. It seemed to have pretty positive reactions when it was airing. But this series follows a bunch of high school girls who are in the literature club, teenage girls, obviously, who are coming into their adolescence, and thus their sexuality, and how comfortable they are in that process. So this was a great read, for one. So we have multiple characters. All of these characters here, they're all kind of they're in the midst of their adolescence, right? Or as Okada has put it, their savage season, and it's not something that people necessarily like to talk about when we are talking about adolescence, but girls, like boys, who are going through puberty, start to have an interest in the opposite sex and having sex, right? So that's not a weird thing. It's not a gross thing. It's not a bad thing. It's a perfectly natural thing. And I don't think I need to explain that to my viewers, because hopefully you've gone through this process yourself. And if you're not into sex, that's also totally fine. And I did like this book a lot because we do follow multiple characters, and there are different ways that they confront their sexuality and kind of figure themselves out. So we have one character who's really keen. She's really interested in sex. She really wants to have it. She really wants to, get involved and, just live her life. Hello, welcome, pint-sized otaku, to the stream. I hope you enjoy. We have another character who's just absolutely repulsed almost by sex. Doesn't even want to think about boys. They're gross and dirty, and if you even think about physical intimacy, that's submitting to your carnal desires, and that's not appropriate for teenage girls, And then we have our main character, who just hasn't really thought about sex or dating or any boys as a thing. She's just like, I don't know. And for a lot of teenage girls, there's a dissonance of, you're kind of expected to be interested in boys, right? A lot of teenage girls are, and in media are portrayed as being boy crazy, always talking about boys. Their life revolves around attracting the other sex. Which is, I'm not going to say that's not a part of being a teenage girl, because that's definitely a part of being a teenage girl. But at the same time, there's also an element of, even though you're expected to want this attention, you can't actually want the attention and be seen as a good girl. Or you can't, it's inappropriate for girls to be thinking about sex. It's inappropriate for girls to masturbate or to explore their sexuality, their physical intimacy. We know, hopefully any young women who are watching my streams, who are in the midst of their teenage years, it's totally normal and it's totally fine. And if you aren't interested in that as well, that's also totally normal and totally fine. And that's something that this series portrays very well, of figuring yourself out and figuring out how comfortable you are with those things. And that can be an age thing, it can be an experience thing, and not everybody hits it okay, 16, you're into it, this is what you want. Some people you don't figure that out until much later or much earlier as well. We do also have, we have another character who's her one wish in the earliest book. She's if you had, if you were going to die or if the world was going to end, what would you want to do before that? And her answer was I would want to have sex. So she's obviously thinking about it, but in a different way from some of the other girls. And then we have our fifth and final girl, who is also initially with our main character she just hasn't even thought about it, hasn't thought about dating boys. But then when she's confronted with the opportunity and the idea of dating a boy, she's not interested. And so it's more so a reflection on her sexuality, something that she's never questioned, prior to this, and how her feelings towards the people around her and have shifted, and obviously go against the grain of what is typically seen as normal. The cover artwork is beautiful. Emoto is a phenomenal artist. I think she also did Forget Me Not, that series, which I think is only 6 or 7 volumes as well, which is, I think, a shonen. I don't remember. I will say that there's one of the characters is very aggressively going after one of the teachers at the school. Nothing happens. I will, maybe spoilers, but fair warning, nothing happens. But it's not inherently wrong or unusual for girls to crush on teachers. And it isn't reciprocated in this either. But I will say that is an element that is presented in the series. That's a shame that the series, the anime, seems to have gone downhill. I don't know. As I said, I don't know if it's an entire complete adaptation. And with the manga, obviously you're following multiple girls' stories, so I don't know who or what they focus on necessarily in the show. But overall, I think the series itself, the manga series at least, does wrap up all the different characters and the larger story arc pretty well. Okay, so we have our 5 girls who are in the literature club, and there's a conundrum. They want to literature and novels and stuff obviously talks about sex a lot. Not in the plainest of words, but there's a lot of allegory and allusion to physical intimacy. And because of the uncomfort of multiple members, they're trying to figure out a way to like discuss sex in literature without feeling like they're talking about it and maybe getting in trouble for that. So they have like their code word, which is literally just SE cross. Like that's what they call it. And then we have the one girl who's interested in the teacher, and some stuff happens there. We have the one girl who's very adamant about not interacting with boys, and then how she changes over the course of the series. And then our main character. So our main character, she has a childhood friend, best friend, neighbor she's grown up with. They're best of friends, and she accidentally walks in on him during some private time of his. She doesn't even think about it. Again, she's not really that aware or wanting to think about sex necessarily. And so when she's confronted with her male childhood friend enjoying himself privately, she then is obviously very confronted by like, oh, this boy who I've known forever and who's like my best friend and who like we grew up together, we had baths together, and like I assumed that he just wasn't interested in sex because I like am not like I haven't thought about it, so I didn't think he'd have thought about it. So like maybe it's me who's wrong, and maybe this is something that I should be thinking about. And then wait a minute, what are my feelings towards this? And oh my god, I'm so embarrassed. And this poor kid, oh my god. Oh, I feel so bad for him. Like, oh my god. And then she like tries to go over and apologize. And she's in his room. I'm like, girl, don't do this. Because I don't think he's home. She goes over, she goes over to apologize, but also her mom's like, oh, can you take this food over to the neighbors because I made too much or whatever? And she's like, okay. Despite her embarrassment, and thankfully for her, she's like, oh, he's not here, it's fine. But she goes in his room and she's like, oh, look, it's a DVD of Totoro. And I'm like, girl, why are you doing this to yourself? Just leave this poor boy's room alone. Because obviously it is not Totoro that was in the DVD case. Obviously not. And again, so she's just like, oh my god. Like, if she's freaking out, he again, like, walks in on her, snooping in his room, and he's just like, oh my god, what? Oh, the embarrassment. And these poor kids. Like, I don't, It's funny, but, like, really, oh, you feel bad. And, I mean, throughout the series, then, they're trying to figure out their feelings for each other. Like, that's one way to kind of confront how you feel about another person. As well, like, because his big interest is trains, right? And he's really into trains. Let's just put it that way. He's really into trains. I'm just like, oh my god! Like, not only did you find his porn stash, but you found his, like, weird porn stash. This poor kid. Oh, this poor kid. Oh god. Anyway, I do like Izumi. He's a good character. I also like the other, like, main male character. I don't remember his name. If my camera would focus, it's this guy. Who you cannot see because the camera is unfocused. And he's the one who's interested in our character who's, like, really... Okay. Oh my god. Why do you go in focus when I'm not doing anything? And then out of focus when I want to show things? This guy here. He's interested. He's attracted to and wants to date our character who is, like, very, like, a prude. I think a prude is the best way to put her. She's not interested. She thinks boys are gross, totally inappropriate to think about sex and dating and kissing those icky boys. Ugh. And he's like, no, I think she's really, like, pretty, and she's so smart and really lovely, and she, having never had any, like, male attention ever in her life, she's not only shocked and confused, well, she's not only shocked when she, like, learns this, but also super, super confused, like, are you talking about the same person? Is he talking about me? And then she thinks that he's tricking her. And I'm like, girl, I get it. Like, I get it. But also this poor guy, he's like, no, I really like you. And she's like, and thank goodness she dislodges that stick up her butt. I'm just gonna say it. Because, again, she all of our girls in the series grow. And I think generally this series is really wonderful in how it addresses female adolescence, female sexuality, and a lot of taboo topics that girls do think about when you're a teenager, but are kind of not allowed to be talked about in polite conversation or in polite society, because we don't want to encourage, bad behavior amongst the young women, right? But it was really sweet, like, for as obviously being about, like, sex and sexuality and puberty and just the roughness of adolescence. It's really sweet and lovely, and it's really supportive as well, I think, of all of these different young women in their lives and their choices and how they interact with each other. It's a very female positive series, which is great. Love that for this series. It's 8 volumes in total, so this was the second half, volume 5 to 8. It's complete in English and obviously in Japanese as well. So if you are wanting to get it, the 8th volume did just come out like last month. Yeah, it's a good time to jump on it, and it's not super duper long. I always appreciate when a series can stick to a concise story without dragging out too long. And I think this is really reflective of a lot of girls' lives and high school experiences. Obviously the events aren't necessarily going to be the same as how everyone went through high school. But I think a lot of the emotions, a lot of the feelings are there and are very genuine and are very true. And this is what Okada is very good at. Obviously, we're talking about emotional manipulation earlier and how she uses very strong emotions, very poignant emotions to get her storylines across. Generally, they are universal in how they deal with, or in the emotions that come across, right? Again, Anohana is about grief, which is something that a majority of people have felt and will be able to empathize with. Makuya is about motherhood or a parenthood or being a child, the mother-child relationship, which majority of people have experienced. Most people have a mom, and so that is very empathetic to people as well. And so, hello, Emma. Welcome to the live stream. So with this, I feel like even if it isn't your experience necessarily, it is very, very much genuine to the female adolescent experience, regardless of what that was, whether you were extremely sexually active, in high school, or not even thinking about boys, or not even thinking about any, you had no interests. Not that you were asexual, but you just didn't. It's cooties. Cooties may still exist. We don't know. There's no scientific evidence that they don't exist. So it does cover like a broad spectrum, and also the toughness of like figuring your feelings out as well. The difference between attraction, physical attraction, and the emotional attraction, love, quote unquote, and those feelings and how they tangle up together, and how sometimes it can be hard to separate them or to figure out what you're actually feeling about somebody, whether you're just like physically attracted to them, you're horny for them, or maybe your heart skips a beat because they're a good person and you really find them lovely or kind or whatever. And hopefully, maybe if you're dating, you have a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. You have both of those things. And that can be difficult to figure out when you're a teenager and you have hormones just messing your brain up. So yeah, I do really recommend this series. It's wonderful. It was a very pleasant surprise when I started reading it last year before, whenever the first volume came out. Because, as I said, I came into it a little bit with some trepidation, just because I'm not always a huge fan of Mari Okada's works, but it definitely didn't disappoint. Yeah, I hope people do check it out. As I said, fair warning, there's a character who's like pretty proactively trying to seduce her teacher. There's also a creepy acting teacher, acting coach. Gross. But also, he got punched in the face, so that's a good thing. Anyway. And again, I think that's pretty reflective of the confusing nature of your emotions. And also, girls in general tend to be attracted to older guys, whether that be a couple years older or many years older than them. And it's not always an appropriate thing, but it's definitely something that happens. And you'd hope that the adults in the situation don't take advantage of that. But we know that's not always the case either, which is gross and weird and not something you should condone, and which this manga doesn't condone. I will say. Yes, Rin, I'm sorry. I decided to stream earlier just because the 11 p.m. start for me has just been rough. Sundays I work and I have to get up pretty early, so I wanted to shift it so I could go to bed at a normal time. And hopefully that's not for the foreseeable future. I want to try and keep it 10 p.m. my time, which I don't know what that it's my time zone. Oh my goodness. My time zone is Greenwich Mean Time plus 8 hours, right? So I want to start at 10, so even if I take like 2 hours, it'll only be midnight rather than 1 a.m. I'm not dealing with daylight savings, which is what screwed me up in the first place, because that the whole jumping back and forth depending on the month, no. We don't do that here, and I'm not dealing with it anymore. All of your friends, all of everyone who's watching, especially my US folks, I appreciate you. I love you. But I'm not pushing the stream back later anymore because it's not sustainable for me. But anyway, yes. Maidens in Your Savage Season was a great manga series. Really happy to have finished the series. I'm sure I'm going to be doing a complete or like a recommendation video for the series in its entirety. I have a couple to do. I have this series. I have Silver Spoon. I have what's the other thing that I just finished? Oh my goodness, I'm so like my brain blanks half the time. Ran in the Grey World. That's another one, and there's something else I don't remember. I have a couple complete like series recommendations to finish or to post, because it's been a long time since I've done one of those, and I do want to kind of catch up on some of the series that I finished recently. So yeah, give this one a shot if you haven't read it yet or heard about it. It's pretty dang good. It's all been put out by Kodansha, obviously, and I hope that we may see more from Okada in regards to manga, because I think for me, in this, comparatively, I've enjoyed this a lot more than I enjoyed her. That makes me sound like really grumpy about her anime, because I do like Anohana and I do like Makuya and I do like quite a few of her works, but they didn't affect me. They didn't feel as genuine as this series in manga form felt. So I don't know. Maybe that's the difference, but it's good. It's good. Yeah. Check it out. Also, last volume, again, spoilers for last volume. We have a teenage pregnancy in this. Not one of our characters, but it does. It's interesting how it portrays teenage pregnancy as well, which I think it does it in a very kind light, which I think is really refreshing. Like, I don't know if it's something that happens in every school, but like for me, there was never. I knew a girl. She left my high school prior to this, but she did leave high school because she became pregnant. And as I said, she wasn't at my high school when that happened, but I had known her since the second grade. So when we'd heard about it, like through Facebook and social media and stuff, there was a real divide in how people treated that and treated her and spoke about her. And it's interesting to see how that is reflective, like fictionally, in this series. Obviously, teenage pregnancy is again seen as a taboo. It's frowned upon, and there's a lot of judgment towards, especially these young mothers. Not like it takes two to tango, guys, but generally these young women are ostracized, or they're scorned a lot, and then some people are the very good support system in that. And for me in my life, like I was never really a close friend with this girl, I will say that, but whenever I see her on like Facebook, again, I'm not on Facebook, but every time that I hear news about like how well she's doing with her son, I'm really happy for her. And even at the time, it was something that I didn't like name call her. But I was worried for her, because I do think that it's a big decision to become a mother as a teenager. But that's a personal decision, and I think that if that's what makes you happy, and if that's something that you're willing to change your entire life for this other person, at such a young age, so that's very commendable. But anyway, I thought that was just a really nice additional thing that this series had, which kind of was something that I don't know how many people had teen pregnancies in their class, like whether that was you yourself or somebody else that you knew in the wider school that you went to. There always seems to be one, especially in larger cities and towns, and how that was dealt with, and how you like reflect on that now, compared to how you treated it when you were in high school. I think that's a pretty interesting reflection and conversation that it is had and can be had, and that this series does cover as well. And yeah, it was great to watch these girls grow. Great to see their relationships and their comfort in themselves and with others, whether that be boys or girls, their friends, whatever. It was a good time. Yes. So that was everything that I read for this week. Not a huge amount, but I just haven't had a huge amount of time for reading. I've had some other stuff to do. But in saying that, I did read a novel, like a book. That took me longer than I expected to. And Buccaneer I was able to hit out, like finish in a couple hours, because those are quick and easy reads. And this is also a pretty quick read. Like the chapters go pretty quick. I didn't even show you the art. What kind of host am I? Jesus. Oh, girl power. Sorry, I opened to a particular page. Boyo. Yeah. Here's the art. I really like it. I like now Emoto's art style. It's very cute. Very pretty. Shows the mood pretty good. Yeah. Yeah, a couple hours. I think that's really lovely, that people seem to have taken it. And I think age does play into that. There's a difference between, I mean, not that much of a difference. There's a difference, but there's a difference between becoming a mother at 15 versus becoming a mother at 18 or 19, or 17. So I do think that obviously does have an effect, and it can. It's really lovely that it seems that your classmate did have people who weren't like there wasn't too much judgment after the initial shock. I mean, I don't know this girl. I don't know her life, obviously, but from how you put that's really nice. And I think hopefully something that becomes kind of more accepted when we talk about these issues. Again, like for me personally, I was never in that situation, and I wouldn't want to be in that situation. It's very stressful. It is a complete life change, and how you decide on whether to keep a baby as well is like there's so much. It's big. It's a big thing in your life, and hopefully, like that, it's something that people become more comfortable talking about. An extension of female sexuality and female adolescence and interest in sex, because we know that girls are just as crazy horny and like weirdly hormonal and stuff in adolescence as boys are, but we're just not allowed to talk about it with the same frankness that boys are allowed to joke about their inherent sexuality during their teenage years. And I'm glad that this series has come out and that I can recommend it as a series that does cover those topics pretty dang well. Yeah. So I'm glad that everyone seems to have enjoyed my thoughts on O Maidens. It's a solid series. It's definitely worth the read. And definitely check it out. Yeah, and absolutely, like there's so much going back to the teenage pregnancy thing. It's for me, I find it commendable. I find it absolutely commendable for a young woman to bring a life into the world if that's her choice. And the fact that some people don't see that as something that should be celebrated, insofar as like there's a baby that needs love and support, and a young woman who's probably very scared and unsure of herself and needs support in that situation. And the fact that some people seem to not have any compassion for that is just absolutely abhorrent, right? It's just it makes me mad, and it makes me sad as well. Yeah, exactly. Life is hard enough without people questioning and putting down everything you decide. Exactly. And whilst I was never in that situation, thank goodness, because I wouldn't want to be in that situation. I wouldn't want to be in that situation of having to make that decision at 16, 17, right? Even now, like I'm 27, I can't, like, just putting out there, I would absolutely love to have children, but I'm not in the position right now where I would want to be having children right now. So for me, like and that, of course, situation, pregnancy doesn't always want to follow situations, right? And follow your best laid plans. But even now, as like a 27-year-old, the choices of how you make your decisions is very different from how you make your decisions as a teenage person. So I couldn't even imagine, with the relative stability in my life that I have now, compared to my 17-year-old self, as not that I didn't have a supportive family or anything, but it's just it's a big decision, I think, is just the way to put that. And it is something that I'm glad I'm glad people seem to be more compassionate about and more readily able to discuss and support people, support young women now more than ever, and not see it as some sort of like shameful, abhorrent moral failing on this young woman who, you know, just made some decisions that have ended up in this position. Whether they're good or bad decisions as well is relative to the person. Yes, exactly. But pardon me, just coughing out all of the rest of that discussion. But thank you guys so much for watching. For all of you who popped in later, there was only 3 things that I read. Of course, the manga that we've been talking about this last half hour, Maidens in Your Savage Season, which is wonderful, highly recommended. I will be doing a series recommendation soon for a video for the channel, hopefully. Fingers crossed. I said it on the live stream, so that means I am culpable to actually doing it. I also read my one light novel of the week, which is Buccaneer Volume 14. Great. Adapts a lot of, the OVAs of the anime series adapts this, right? That makes sense. But like with all of the, I mean, you're not going to jump into a series with Volume 14, hopefully. Don't do that. You're not going to understand anything going on if you do that. But I do recommend Buccaneer in general. It's probably, if not my favorite, it's in my top 3 light novels, especially of currently being released stuff, ongoing stuff. Yeah, it's great. It's very, very good. And finally, the first that I read and talked about was the final novel of Discworld, Rising Steam by Terry Pratchett. Solid ending to a wonderful franchise, and whilst it is sad we will never get any more of this series, it's also a quite hopeful and interesting and kind of open-ended, but not, I don't know, it ends the series at a good place with a lot of potential, a lot of stuff for you as a reader to imagine and to think about, but that doesn't necessarily have to be expanded upon in novel form. And I think that's really effective with this book. But yeah, thank you guys so much for popping in, coming to chat with me. I'm glad that everyone seems to have had a wonderful time. I hope you have a good rest of your day, wherever you are, whether your day's just starting, your weekend's just starting, or if it's the end of your Saturday like it is here for me. I do always appreciate when you guys can come in for a live stream. I also mentioned at the beginning of the video that I don't know what happened last week. I know that it didn't send out notifications until after the fact, and then there was just some weird stuff going on. We know that I'm not the most technologically literate person, but I don't know how I could have screwed that up so terribly. Anyway, thankfully, that was not repeated, and I think that I fixed it, so hopefully it shouldn't happen. It shouldn't happen again. But I will see you in the next video, whether it be a wrap-up like this. I should have a first impressions video, maybe a complete series review to talk about before the end of the week, and also the newest episode of the podcast hasn't been recorded yet, but should be up before Christmas, hopefully. So if you do follow the podcast, that will be available then, and you know it'll be on here and then also on podcasting platforms, so you can listen to it whenever, however you get to that. And it's a pretty interesting topic this month, because we're basically just talking about all of our favorite new series for 2020. Because despite the absolute trash fire that this year has been, we've gotten some dang good manga. There's been a lot of really cool debuts coming out, and a lot of cool licenses, and a lot of cool series finishing, that we've had a lot of cool stuff happen in regards to manga this year. So yeah, if that's something that interests you, you can maybe keep an eye out for this month's episode. But yes, thank you guys so much for watching. I will catch you in the next video. Bye till then.